Hey everyone, welcome back along to the show. Today I have with me Yasmeen Mosley. She is the VP of Consumer Insights, I should say, and Analytics at the creative agency called Swift. Yasmeen, thanks for coming along to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jason. Yeah, I work for Swift. Swift is an agency in the Wunderman Thompson network. I like to describe Swift as a modern alchemy of data science, strategy, and creative, all baked in social. We love to say that we build brands for the social world because we are truly in a social world.
We definitely are. We definitely are. And what's sort of your bit? So we wanted to talk about visualization, storytelling, how you use those things to sort of bring analytics and insights to life. But sort of how do you fit into the Swift business?
Well, that's the unique thing about me is that I have the title of consumer insights and analytics, which you don't see too often in the industry. And really, it's about bridging the gap or blending the arts and sciences between strategy and data, and telling that story about the data, which is often missed in our industry. And how you tell that story is through data visualization, right? Especially if you're presenting to an audience that isn't technical or not truly engrossed in the data. They want to see the trends that you're
Yeah.
seeing intuitively.
Yeah. And when you say tell stories, like what do you mean? Why is that important in your world, in social, in engaging with the brands that you talk to?
Well, the stories, it's what leads to insights, right? It's uncovering the why. Oftentimes, I come across analysis that are truly observations, right? So we want to understand what's happened and take the end user or the audience through that journey from all the way from awareness through, conversion.
Right. As in kind of through sort of a buying journey or a sort of
Through a
exploration
buying
journey.
journey,
Yeah.
exactly. So all the stages throughout the customer journey, you want to tell that story using data to see where there are gaps and where there are opportunities.
It's really interesting because obviously there's as a consumer myself, you shop, you buy things, you engage with brands, you browse around, read a bit of content, you click on something, someone shared, you do all these things, and that might lead to a purchase. It might lead to you just now knowing some things that you didn't know before. But of course, when you roll that up to everybody's doing that, there's hidden gems, right? There's stories in there that might help brands to kind of better understand how people interact with them.
Right, and adding that additional layer, right? Is it everyone doing it, or is this I can't even talk, specific demographic or target audience, right? Is it primarily
Yeah.
primarily male or female or specific age? It's that story, that additional layer that gives the insights to optimization.
And how do you guys fit in then? So what sort of value do you bring to that kind of process? And I don't mean that in a kind of, what does your business do, but just kind of where, whether you're in-house or whether you're an agency like there's a kind of role to play there. So what is that role? How do you sort of help bring stories to life? How do you help identify what the story is?
It's truly about finding the not so obvious insights, right? I mentioned that a lot of analysis is usually lazy, right? It's bringing forth the obvious trends and observations and then like packaging it up and saying these are insights. Where we are differentiated in the industry is that we look for the not so obvious. So we try to blend audience, content, and performance and put that all together. So what I mean by that is understanding who is or isn't engaging with content, right?
Mm,
What content exists in the world today, especially amongst the competitors,
mm.
and then what is the performance? Is it performing or is it not performing? And so when you tie those all together, that's when you get the not so obvious insights, which fuels creative ideas.
So do you think about this in terms of um, exploring data um, with sort of almost no end? Are you you're sort of exploring around, seeing what stories you can find, seeing what trends you can find, seeing what insights you can find, or are you starting with a story which is, I don't know, we're trying to understand X, we're trying to build a picture of Y, we're trying to create this customer journey. Where do you start? Do you start with kind of an end in mind and then try and identify what the story is, or do you just sort of look for needle in a haystack and try and identify what sort of pops out of it?
It's following your passion and curiosity, right? We usually do start with a few questions. So one, like what problem are we trying to solve? What hypothesis are we trying to prove or disprove, right? What
Mm,
conclusions are we trying to present at the end of the analysis? But then we also focus on our measurement plan, right? What is our primary KPI or metric for success? What data would be imperative to the story, most compelling, most interesting? And then, of course, back to data visualization is what visualization will tell that story in the most truthful way.
Right. And is there kind of tricks to the trade then of choosing the right visualization to help tell the story?
Yeah, I think there are a few tricks. I would say one, like, limiting the number of visualizations on a slide, especially if you're presenting in PowerPoint, goes really far. People are afraid of data. I don't know why, but they're afraid of data. So you want to limit the conversation in the story and keep everyone's focus. Second is using colors on the same color palette. If you make it too busy, it just becomes hard to follow. And then third was really interesting, and I noticed a lot of people don't do that, is selecting color through the lens of black and white, right? Oftentimes your audience, or maybe someone that is colorblind, that doesn't see the difference in shades or colors. So making sure that a broad audience can interpret the data in the same way.
There's definitely there's a kind of a need to think about your audience really deeply there, not only in terms of their kind of segment or the demographic or whatever, but also their diversity, their background. How do you represent and how do you take into account the kind of mix of audience that you're going to be presenting to, so that, as you say, you can take into account how they interact with information, how they interact with data, how they see colors or not, as the case may be.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And it kind of touches on like one of my pet peeves, which is seeing the color red represented in a chart. Like my number one rule is do not use the color red unless it's a negative number.
What's wrong with red?
I think number one, right? Red is associated with a negative emotion, right? So usually when someone sees red, it's bad. So you never want to have a positive number in red, because now it's derailing your storytelling. So you want to use color with purpose.
This that kind of, then I suppose, how do you know that? Not you, but how does one know that? I mean, red's quite an intuitive one, right? We know red is bad. We know red means stop. We know red means down normally in charts. But how, is there some science behind that, either psychology or something else that kind of says, these things work, or is it much more of a kind of test and learn kind of concept with the audience that you're talking to?
For me, how I stumbled upon it was definitely test and learn, especially as I was working on my storytelling. I had this like epiphany moment where I was like, wow, people love these charts. When I put together a fancy chart, people stop listening to me and they're focused on the data and the trends. So I'm like, oh, wow, like this is my partner that's helped me, tell the story. And as I start to do research, there's so much research on colors and how it impacts emotion. I mean, even down to like fast food restaurants. I don't know if you noticed, but most fast food restaurants, they use like yellow and red because it means like urgency, quick, or something, quick, get in, get out. And then like more loungy restaurants or upscale restaurants use like neutral colors, cool colors, because they want someone to stay focused. So understanding the color and the impact of emotion definitely applies to your charts in your data visualizations.
Yeah, great. The psychology of color must noted to follow up on that one and have a read around. Is I guess the same can be said for the type of chart you use. So there's obviously the colors you use within the chart, but I guess depending on the message or the type of analysis, you might choose or identify a different type of chart that you use. In some instances, bar charts, sometimes scatter plots. There'll be a different reason to use each chart. Are you again, is there some science behind that? Is that basically just a maths-based decision on, what the analysis you're presenting works better in certain ways, or something else?
Yeah, it kind of depends, right? So I mentioned like early on, starting with a problem and understanding like what problem are you trying to solve? What story are you trying to tell? And then a primary metric. Oftentimes as analysts, we get so excited, we want to showcase everything. So you want to narrow down that list of KPIs. And then second, in regards to the type of chart, it kind of depends. I always like to say the chart should speak for itself. So if it's like just numbers, sometimes a table just helps, right? Just putting a flat table, because simplicity is key. If it's people, maybe it's objects and lines, right? If it's a process, you use a flow chart. Geographic data, I love to use choropleths, that's what it's called, or maps. And then if it's like a non-chronological list, use a bulleted point. So it kind of depends on like what would be most effective for your presentation. And then choosing the right KPI to represent that.
Yeah, that's probably that's the hard bit, isn't it? The making sure you pick the right KPI, sorry, because what you're normally I see what you're trying to achieve is to help elicit understanding with people that are looking at it, but also drive some action or some change
Yeah.
off the back of it.
So what I always like to start with, and I coined this within my team, is what is the ugly slide, right? If you were to remove all the insights, all the narrative, and just had to narrow it down to one sentence, what would that one sentence be to tell the story of that chart? And usually,
Nice.
like, analysts are taken aback a little bit. They're like, well, if I only have to say what's happening in one sentence, what would that be? Maybe I should change my chart to
Yeah.
help tell that story.
Yeah. Use a sentence rather than a chart.
Exactly.
Is that just on that actually? Is the importance of narrative around charts? So what people engage in stories in different ways, don't they? Visually or through words or through spoken, video. Is there like an importance of words and narrative around charts, or is really the chart what you want to make impactful?
Well, I like the chart to speak for itself, but then I also like to ladder that to the pyramid principles of writing for consultants, right? Where
Right.
essentially you start with like the recommendation, like let's get to it. Like what is everyone waiting for? And then you start to do some deductive reasoning where you work back into the insights that supports that recommendation, and then the results. And then of course you button it up with, the objective of why we were here today. And so that creates this nice package of just leading an audience through what you've seen through a data lens.
Right. So yeah, that context that helps just sort of bring it to light. And obviously there's not always a person who's there explaining the chart or explaining the story. So it sort of needs both the chart and then the context to help give reference to people to help them understand it. I mean, does that also change depending on the maturity, the literacy of the person that you're interacting with? Because some people just get this and understand data, understand insight, can read charts well, and understand what to do with the information once they see it. And other people are quite new to that. So do you think there's a need or a necessity to sort of adjust either charts or color or all the things we've talked about, tailored to the kind of level of maturity or literacy of the people that you're interacting with?
Yes and no. So, my number one rule is you have to assume that your audience is not data literate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So simplicity is key.
Yeah.
However, if you are presenting in front of a very technical audience that loves to be in the weeds, that's where you have to be the king, queen, or emperor of back pocket questions. What I mean by that is anticipate some of the questions your audience may ask, right? And how deep will they go? I think Amazon has this rule of like the 5 whys. So you have to ask yourself why 5 times on that one data point to truly get deep insights.
Right. Therefore you're saying sort of need the insight ready so you can kind of get into that detail if asked.
Exactly. And the reason why I say save it for back pocket is sometimes you want to lead an audience to questions so that you appear very informed and smart and data savvy, right? You don't have to share everything that you know, but keep some close to the vest just in case a question does arise.
Yeah. What are some of the sort of important considerations then? I think we've probably covered some of them, but when sharing insights with people, so you've done some analysis, you've identified a story, you figured out a pattern, or a consumer behavior or a quirk in behavior on social or something like that. What are some of the considerations sort of going into that then that you need to have in order to make sure that you're prepared and ready for that audience?
I think one, like, is it insightful? Like, does it mean something? Is it worth even translating or sharing? 2, what is the recommendation that would come off of it? Oftentimes, data analysts find something that's really interesting, but then when you ask them, okay, what do we do about it? They kind of freeze. So thinking through that one extra step. And then third, I would say like use annotations on your chart. Like if we're focusing just on the content and collateral, annotations help a lot. Just explaining why things may or may not have happened goes really far.
Great. In the kind of all those things you've talked about, there's so many different I I guess skills, but there's lots of different capabilities you need in order to do that. You've talked about storytelling. You've talked about understanding color and psychology of color. You've talked about understanding your audience. You talked about be able to present to people. It's all these kind of things, skills, capabilities that it sounds like are needed in order to be really good at this. Is there, are there some specific things? Are there some baseline? And actually, I didn't mention any of the technical skills I imagine you need around data and building dashboards and all those good things. Are there like a set of really fundamental skills you need in order to be good at either storytelling or data visualization or both?
I would just say like they're soft skills, right? I would say passion and curiosity. Sometimes
Mm,
we're playing in a world full of data and the answer doesn't come to surface quickly. So it's the passion and curiosity that helps you to push forward and discover the why, right? Especially to scrub out all the noise. I would say it's
mm,
those two things. Secondarily, the related to curiosity is like exploring new tools. There are so many data visualization tools out there that you have to be curious enough to just explore and see what would fit with your
mm.
storytelling, and not being afraid to go back to the basics. I mean, Excel has a great tool set when it comes to charts, and sometimes the simplest chart is the best chart.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And anything else? And because obviously there's a lot of interact. The way you talk about this is a lot of interaction with people and presenting to people. Does that, in its own right? Because I can see where passion and curiosity will help you get to an answer. But is that kind of then also going to see you through to creating the answer, presenting it to people, taking feedback, all those good things? Is there sort of more to it, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Just because you're passionate and curious doesn't mean your counterparts or the team working around you is. So,
Mm,
not being afraid to share those insights and to ask questions to the people around you, because the people around you may help you to develop those insights. They may know the why behind certain trends. Was an activation turned on or off at a certain time? Did they see something related a few months back? Having that conversation and being a hand raiser and not being afraid to present your initial findings goes really far.
mm.
And I think that's what we do so well at Swift, right? Is that we collaborate across disciplines and we're always having that two-way dialogue.
Right. With what other teams? There's some specific kind of areas you need to
Oh,
interact with.
specifically strategy and creative. So, I mean,
Mm,
before we kick off any new project, we leave our titles at the door and we start a project with, hey, what are your strategic ideas? What is your hypothesis when it comes to the data? What do you think we'll see at the end of this campaign, right?
right.
We start bringing forth some of those insights early on and collaborate back and forth. Oftentimes, I flag to my counterpart, Leslie North, the EVP of strategy. I'm like, hey, this is really interesting. This brand thinks that their primary audience is actually millennials, but in fact, is Gen Z. Like, there's an uptick in Gen Z engagement. Like, let's dig in a little bit more. And so
Mm.
I say that to say, just bringing forth some of those initial insights and my curiosity and flagging that to her early on is what helps to create some compelling brand narratives.
That's just reminded me that point there about my question on where do you start with a kind of hypothesis you're testing, or play around the data and see what pops out, and that's just sort of come out again there, which is you had an assumption around, or your customer had an assumption around the customer base, and it turned out to be slightly different. So I think is there something here about having some assumptions, but making sure you test them, having some hypotheses, but being open to exploring, other avenues when you're looking for a story to tell.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before I start any project, I always try to separate client assumptions versus facts,
Mm,
because oftentimes when a client is presenting a new business case or an RFP, it's full of assumptions, right? So you want to
yeah.
prove or disprove that. And then secondarily is have a hypothesis, right? Have a point of view, because you want to prove or disprove your point of view as well. And that way you're truly bringing insights that's baked into data and into facts.
Yeah. Have you had situations where that's gone, the wrong way, as in no one's interested in the fact, it's about showing that the idea is the one, the right one to go with, and making sure that the data backs up the hypothesis rather than trying to find the facts within the data, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
people are often trying to sort of have an idea and want the data to prove their idea is right, rather than trying to understand what the best idea is.
Yeah, all the time. And I think it's just knowing what your primary KPI for success is and
Mm,
helping having that the insights ladder up into that story. Secondarily, I mean, money never lies, right? So if you can back into customer lifetime value or revenue,
mm.
usually that's like the pivotal point when someone does not agree with the data, right? But again, it's being the king or queen of back pocket and being curious enough to push forward and look for other avenues to help support and tie that story in.
Right, right. What are some of the sort of moving that on? What are some of the biggest challenges do you think in this space of storytelling and visualization that you've seen, and how have you
I
kind of
think the
come across
biggest
them?
challenge is scrubbing out the noise, especially in social. There is so much data. Sometimes it's
Mm,
hard to stay focused. And so that's why I mentioned early on, you have to just outline like your list of questions. Like, what is the primary problem you're trying to solve? Because oftentimes you will get distracted and you'll go down this rabbit hole chasing data that
yeah,
isn't relevant to the conversation or story. So I would say that is number one, is just scrubbing out the noise.
and are there any others? Any other challenges you've
Um,
sort of find?
I think there's a like new platforms constantly coming up, and so trying to
Mm,
figure out where an audience is and if it's relevant or if it's not, especially in social, is a huge challenge, right? Um, so I think it's just like being at the forefront of innovation and always having your ear to the ground or a pulse on a business. That's a challenge in itself. So I
mm.
would say like sign up for publications, even if you're not reading those e-newsletters, like at least you'll see a subject line, which will hopefully plant a seed if
Yeah,
a similar situation arises.
spark an interest. Yeah. Where just sort of thinking about wrapping up, where do you think this goes? So visualization and dashboards and analytics, it's all changed so much over the years, and the technology's improved so much. There's so much more opportunity to bring some really interesting ways of engaging audiences through visualization. And of course, the art of storytelling has been around for years, but bringing those two things together has been relative. It's been a bit new, all right, in many ways. But where do you think this all goes? Do you think there's um continued evolution that we'll see? Like, are there some newer things that you're either working on now that you think will gain some more traction? What's some of the sort of looking forward, some of the best practices that might evolve, the things that might change in storytelling and visualization?
I mean, I think it's growing. The reason why I fell into insights, right, data visualization and storytelling is because in most of my roles throughout my career, I've always been a technical person sitting amongst a bunch of marketers, right, or
Right,
salespeople. So
right,
while, I may report into an engineering group or BI group, the people around me were salespeople. They didn't care about the data. They cared about the revenue and the bottom line,
yeah,
right? And
as they
so
should.
I said, yeah, exactly. And so in order to do that, though, you have to learn how to speak two different languages and understand what new technology is out there, but how to
Mm.
translate that to a non-technical audience. I think like the ceiling is infinite. So you asked, where does it go? I think it's just going to continue to grow. I think it's going to become a point where everyone has data as part of their core and their foundation, and analysis is just intuitive, right? Everyone's going to be speaking the same language.
Oh, I love the optimism on that point. I
At least I'm
agree.
hopeful, right?
I agree. There's work to do for that to happen, but no, I think it's almost critical actually for an organization to get good at this, and
Right.
certainly visualization helps people to learn the craft, to care about the craft, to get into the craft.
Well, and then especially, you and I spoke a little bit beforehand about COVID. Like COVID is around us, and I think the impact of COVID is that it's pushed everyone into this digital world. And so in this
Mm,
digital world, there's so much data that we kind of have no choice but to look at it because that's where
yeah,
everyone is now.
yeah. Just actually one more thought that I've got here is about some of those new platforms. So when I think about Netflix, for example, and the data that they hold, it's great and they can do all sorts of interesting things. But when I think about platform like TikTok and the amount of data points that they get in terms of the interaction that people have with their platform, it's infinite compared to what Netflix can do, and therefore their tailoring, their focusing can be exponentially improved. Do you think there's a line where social has too much data and therefore they've got too much power and too much influence over consumers. I know it's strictly not around storytelling, but it kind of feeds into it, because actually some of the understanding consumer behavior plays into a story that then drives the algorithms that then changes and improves or makes what they do worse. So yeah, just interested in your view about whether social data in its own right, starts to give the platforms that sort of own that too much power.
I think we're already in it. I think as long
Mm,
as, these platforms are adhere to privacy concerns, right? And limit how much access third parties like myself have to that data, I think we'll be fine. We're already in it. Marketers have been using data for a long time. It's just that
mm,
now it's at the forefront of conversation.
yeah.
People are scared of like AI and big data, not realizing that we use it every day. Even our smartphones are using AI technology to tag our photos. So I think as long as we're conscious and using it in the right way, I mean, we'll be fine.
Yeah, nice. I thought I'd get an optimistic answer from you, given the
Of course,
conversation
of
we've
course.
had. Love it. Well, look, listen, Yasmeen, it's been great to talk to you. I love the kind of the ability and I love storytelling as an art, actually, because that's so clever, and organizations and companies like Disney have been doing that so well for so long, and bringing that into the forefront of data, I think, is super important, because as you say, it helps engage people, helps to help people understand what's happening. And it's been brilliant to hear your thoughts and insight into how you make that work. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. And thanks everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and we'll catch you again soon.